Hi, I'm reading from Autobiography of a Yogi. I'm starting on page 150. Among the philosophers, professors, lawyers, and scientists who came to the Hermitage, a number arrived for their first visit with the thought of meeting an orthodox religionist. Occasionally, a supercilious smile or a glance of amused tolerance would betray that the newcomers expected nothing more than a few pious platitudes. After talking to Sri Yukteswar and discovering that he possessed precise insight into their specialized fields of knowledge, the visitors would depart reluctantly. My guru ordinarily was gentle and affable to guests. His welcome was given with charming cordiality, yet inveterate egotists sometimes suffered an invigorating shock. They confronted in Master either a frigid indifference or a formidable opposition, ice or iron. A noted chemist once crossed swords with Sri Yukteswar. The visitor would not admit the existence of God, inasmuch as science has devised no means of detecting him. So you would have explicably failed to isolate the supreme power in your test tubes. The master's gaze was stern. I recommend a new experiment. Examine your thoughts unremittingly for 24 hours, then wonder no longer at God's absence. A celebrated scholar received a similar jolt. It came during his first visit to the ashram. The rafters resounded as the guests recited passages from Mahabharata, Upanishads, and Bhasyas, commentaries by Shankara. I'm waiting to hear you. Sri Yukteswar's tone was inquiring, as though silence had reigned. The pundit was puzzled. Quotations there have been in superabundance. Master's words convulsed me with mirth as I squatted in my corner at a respectful distance from the visitor. But what original commentary can you supply from the uniqueness of your particular life? What holy text have you absorbed and made your own? In what ways have these timeless truths renovated your nature? Are you content to be a hollow Victrola, mechanically repeating the words of other men? I give up. The scholar's chagrin was comical. I have no inter-realization. For the first time, perhaps, he understood the discerning placement of a comma does not atone for a spiritual coma. For the first time, perhaps, he understood that discerning placement of a comma does not atone for a spiritual coma. These bloodless pendants smell unduly of the lamp, my guru remarked after the departure of the chastened one. They consider philosophy to be a gentle intellectual setting up exercise. Their elevated thoughts are carefully unrelated to either the crudity of outward action or the scourging interdiscipline. Master stressed on other occasions the futility of mere book learning. Do not confuse understanding with a larger vocabulary, he remarked. Sacred writings are beneficial in stimulating desire for inward realization. If one stands at a time, is slowly assimilated. Otherwise, continual intellectual study may result in vanity, false satisfaction, and undigested knowledge. Yukteswar related one of his own experiences in spiritual edification. The scene was a forest hermitage in eastern Bengal, where he observed the procedure of a renowned teacher, Dabrubalov. His method, at once simple and difficult, was common in ancient India. Dabrubalava had gathered his disciples around him in the sylvan solitudes. The holy Bhagavad Gita was open before them. Steadfastly they looked at one passage for a half an hour, then closed their eyes. Another half an hour slipped away. The master gave a brief comment. Motionless, they meditated again for an hour. Finally the Guru spoke. "Do you now understand the stanza?" "Yes, sir." One in the group ventured this assertion. "No, not fully. Seek the spiritual vitality that has given these words the power to rejuvenate India century after century." Another hour passed in silence. The master dismissed the students and turned to Sri Yukteswar. "Do you know the Bhagavad Gita?" "No, sir, not really. Through my eyes and mind have run through its pages many times." Hundreds have replied to me differently. The great sage smiled at Master in blessing. If one busies oneself with an outer display of scriptural wealth, what time is left for silent inward diving after the priceless pearls? Sri Yukteswar directed the study of his own disciples by the same intensive method of one-pointedness. Wisdom is not assimilated with the eyes, but with the atoms. He said, "When your conviction of a truth is not merely in your brain, but in your being, you may diffidently vouch for its meaning." He discouraged any tendency a student might have to consider book knowledge a necessary step to spiritual realization. The Rishis wrote in one sentence profundities that commentating scholars busied themselves over for generations. He said, "Endless literary controversy is for sluggard minds. What more quickly liberating though that God is, nay, God. What more quickly liberating thought than God is, nay, God. But man does not easily return to simplicity. It is seldom God for an intellectualist, but rather learned pomposities. His ego is pleased that he can grasp such erudition. Men who were pridefully conscious of their wealth or worldly position were likely in Master's presence to add humility to their own possessions. On one occasion, a local magistrate requested an interview at the seaside hermitage in Puri. The man, who was reputed to be ruthless, had it well within his power to dispossess us of the ashram. I mentioned this fact to my guru, but he seated himself with an uncompromising air and did not rise to meet the visitor. Slightly nervous, I squatted near the door. Sri Yukteswar failed to ask me to fetch a chair for the magistrate, who had to be content with a wooden box. There was no fulfillment of the man's obvious expectation that his importance would be ceremoniously acknowledged. A metaphysical discussion ensued. The guest blundered through misinterpretations of the scriptures. As his accuracy sank, his ire rose. "Do you know that I stood first in the M.A. examination?" Reason had forsaken him, but he could still shout. "Mr. Magistrate, you forget that this is not your courtroom." The master replied evenly, "From your childish remarks one would surmise that your college career had been unremarkable. A university degree in any case is not related to Vedic realization. Saints are not produced in batches every semester like accountants." After a stunned silence, the visitor laughed heartily. "This is my first encounter with a heavenly magistrate," he said. Later he made a formal request, couched in the legal terms that were evidently part and parcel of his being, to be accepted as a probationary disciple. On several occasions Sri Yukteswar, like Lahari Mahasaya, discouraged unripe students who wished to join the Swami order. To wear the ochre robe when one lacks God realization is misleading to society, the two masters said. Forget the outward symbols of renunciation which may injure you by inducing a false pride. Nothing matters except your steady daily spiritual advancement. For that use Kriya Yoga. In measuring the worth of a man, a saint employs an invariable criterion, one far different from the shifting yardsticks of the world. Humanity, so variegated in its own eyes, is seen by a master to be divided into only two classes: ignorant men who are not seeking God, and wise men who are. My guru personally attended to the details connected with the management of his property. Unscrupulous persons on various occasions attempted to secure possession of master's ancestral land. With determination and even by instigating lawsuits, Sri Yukteswar outwitted every opponent. He underwent those painful experiences from a desire never to be a begging guru or a burden on his disciples. His financial independence was one reason why my alarmingly outspoken master was innocent of the cunnings of diplomacy. Unlike teachers who have to flatter their supporters, my guru was impervious to the influence, open or subtle, of others' wealth. Never did I hear him ask or even hint for money for any purpose. His hermitage training was given free to all disciples. A court deputy arrived one day at the Simrapur ashram to serve a legal summons. A disciplined named Kanani and I ushered the man into master's presence. The officer's attitude towards Sri Yukteswar was offensive. "It will not do you good to leave the shadows of your hermitage and breathe the honest air of a courtroom," he said contemptuously. "It will do you good to leave the shadows of your hermitage and breathe the honest air of a courtroom," he said contemptuously. I could not contain myself. "Another word of your insolence and you will be on the floor," I advanced threateningly. Connie also shouting at the deputy, "You wretch! Dare you bring your blasphemies into this sacred ashram?" But master stood protectingly in front of his abuser. "Do not get excited over nothing. This man is only doing his rightful duty." The officer, dazed at his varying reception, respectfully offered a word of apology and sped away. Amazing it was to find that a master with such a fiery will could be so calm within. He fitted the Vedic definition of a man of God: softer than a flower where kindness is concerned, stronger than the thunder where principles are at stake. There are always those in this world who, in Browning's words, endure no light, being themselves obscure. Occasionally an outsider, fevered over some imaginary grievance, would berate Sri Yukteswar. My imperturbable guru would listen politely, analyzing himself to see if any shred of truth lay within the denunciation. These scenes would bring to my mind one of my master's inimitable observations. Some people try to be tall by cutting off the heads of others. The unfailing composure of a saint is impressive beyond any sermon. He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city. That's Proverbs verse 16, chapter 16, verse 32. I often reflected that my majestic master could easily have been an emperor or world-shaking warrior had his mind been centered on fame or worldly achievement. He had chosen instead to storm those citadels of wrath and egotism than to fall whose fall is the height of man. He had chosen instead to storm those citadels of wrath and egotism, whose fall is the height of a man. Chapter 13: The Sleepless Saint. Please permit me to go to the Himalayas. I hope in unbroken solitude to achieve continuous divine communion. I actually once addressed these ungrateful words to my master. Seized by one of the unpredictable delusions that occasionally assail the devotee, I felt a growing impatience with the hermitage duties and college studies. A feebly extenuating circumstance is that my proposal was made when I had known Sri Yukteswar for only 6 months. Not yet had I fully surveyed his towering stature. Many hillmen live in the Himalayas, yet possess no God perception. My Guru's answer came slowly and simply. Wisdom is better sought from a man of realization than from an inert mountain. Ignoring Master's plain hint that he, not a hill, was my teacher, I repeated my plea. Sri Yukteswar vouchsafed no reply. I took his silence for consent, a precarious but convenient interpretation. In my Calcutta home that evening I busied myself with travel preparations. Tying a few articles inside a blanket, I remembered a similar bundle surreptitiously dropped from my attic window a few years earlier. I wondered if there was to be another ill-fated flight towards the Himalayas. The first time my spiritual elation had been high. Tonight my conscience smote me at the thought of leaving my Guru. The following morning I sought out Binhari Pundit, my Sanskrit professor at Scottish Church College. Sir, you have told me that my friendship with a great disciple you have told me of your friendship with a great disciple of Lahari Messiah. Please give me his address. You mean Ram Gopal Muzumdar. I call him the Sleepless Saint. He is always awake in an ecstatic consciousness. His home is in Ranbajapur near Tarakaswar. I thanked the pundit and entrained immediately for Tarakaswar. I hoped to silence my misgivings by getting permission from the Sleepless Saint to engage myself in lonely meditation in the Himalayas. Bihari Pundit had told me that Ram Gopal had received illumination after many years of Kriya Yoga practiced in isolated caves in Bengal. In Tarakaswar, I made my way to a famous shrine. Hindus regard it with veneration, such as Catholics feel for the Lourdes sanctuary in France. Innumerable healing miracles had occurred at Tarakaswar, including one for a member of my family. I sat in the temple there for a week, my eldest aunt once told me, observing a complete fast. I prayed for a recovery of your uncle Sarada from a chronic malady. On the 7th day I found a herb materialized in my hand. I made a brew of the leaves and gave it to your uncle. His disease vanished at once and never reappeared. I entered the sacred Tarakaswar shrine. The altar contains nothing but a round stone. Its circumference, beginninglessness and endlessness, makes it aptly significant of the infinite. In India, cosmic abstractions are understood even by the unlettered peasant. In fact, Westerners have sometimes accused him of living on abstractions. My own mood at the moment was so austere that I felt disinclined to bow before the stone symbol. God should be sought, I reflected, only within the soul. I left the temple without genuflection and walked briskly towards the outlying village of Ranbajapur. I was not sure of the way. My appeal to a passerby for information caused him to sink into long cogitation. When you come to a crossroad, turn right and keep going, he finally pronounced oracularly. Obeying the directions, I wended the way alongside the banks of the canal. Darkness fell. The outskirts of the jungle village were alive with winking fireflies and the howls of nearby jackals. The moonlight was too faint to be helpful. I stumbled on for 2 hours. Welcome clanging of a cowbell. My repeated shouts eventually brought a peasant to my side. I'm looking for Ram Gopal Babu. No such person lives in our village. The man's tone was surly. You are probably a lying detective. Hoping to allay suspicion in his politically troubled mind, I touchingly explained my predicament. He took me to his home and offered a hospitable welcome. Ranbajapur is far from here. At the crossroads you should have turned left, not right. My earlier informant, I thought sadly, was a definite menace to travelers. After a relishable meal of coarse rice, lentil dal, and curry of potatoes with raw bananas, I retired to a small hut adjoining the courtyard. In the distance, villagers were singing to the loud accompaniment of mridangas and cymbals. Sleep was inconsiderable that night. I prayed deeply to be directed to the secluded yogi Ram Gopal. As the first streaks of dawn penetrated the fissures of my hut, I set out for Ranbajapur. Crossing rough paddy fields, I trudged over sickled stumps of the prickly plant and around mounds of dried clay. An occasionally met peasant would inform me invariably that my destination was only across 2 miles. In 6 hours the sun traveled victoriously from horizon to meridian, but I began to feel I would ever be distant from Ranbajapur by only 1 karash. At mid-afternoon my world was still an endless paddy field. Heat pouring from the inescapable sky was bringing me to near collapse. I saw a man approaching me at a leisurely pace. I hardly dared utter my usual question, lest it summon the monotonous Jista Krasha. The stranger halted beside me. Short and slight, he was physically unimpressive, save an extraordinarily pair of piercing dark eyes. I was planning to leave Ranbajapur, but your purpose was good, so I awaited you. He shook his finger in my astounded face. Aren't you clever to think that unannounced you would pounce on me? That Professor Bihari had no right to give you my address. Considering that introduction of myself would be mere verbosity at the presence of this master, I stood speechless, somewhat hurt at my reception. His next remark was abruptly put. Tell me, Where do you think God is? Why, He is within me and everywhere. I doubtless looked as bewildered as I felt. All-pervading, eh? The saint chuckled. Then why, young sir, did you fail to bow to the infinite in the stone symbol in the Tarakaswar temple yesterday? Your pride caused you the punishment of being misdirected by the passerby who was not bothered by fine distinctions between left and right. Today, too, you have had a fairly uncomfortable time of it. I agreed wholeheartedly, wonderstruck that an omnipresent eye hid within the unremarkable body before me. Healing strength emanated from the yogi. I was instantly refreshed in the scorching field. The devotee inclines to think his path to God is the only way, he said. Yoga, through which diversity is found within, is doubtless the highest road, as Lahari Messiah has told us. But, discovering the Lord within, we soon perceive Him without. Holy shrines in Tarakaswar and elsewhere are rightly venerated as nuclear centers of spiritual power. The saint's censorious attitude vanished. His eyes became compassionately soft. He patted my shoulder. Young yogi, I see you are running away from your master. He has everything you need. You should return to him, he added. Mountains cannot be your guru. The same thought that Yutaswar had expressed 2 days earlier. Masters are under no cosmic compulsion to live on mountains only. My companion glanced at me quizzically. The Himalayas in India and Tibet have no monopoly on saints. What one does not trouble to find within will not be discovered by transporting the body hither and yon. As soon as the devotee is willing to go even to the ends of the earth for spiritual enlightenment, his guru appears nearby. I silently agreed, recalling my prayer in the Benares hermitage, followed by the meeting of Sri Yutaswar in the crowded lane. Are you able to have a little room where you can close the door and be alone? Yes, I reflected that this saint descended from the general to the particular with disconcerting speed. That is your cave. The yogi bestowed on me a gaze of illumination which I have never forgotten. That is your sacred mountain. That is where you will find the kingdom of God. His simple words instantaneously banished my lifelong obsession with the Himalayas. In a burning paddy field I awoke from the dream of mountains and eternal snows. Young sir, your divine thirst is laudable. I feel great love for you. Ram Gopal took my hand and led me to a quaint hamlet within a jungle clearing. The adobe houses were covered with coconut leaves and rustically adorned over their entrances with fresh tropical flowers. The saint seated me on the umbrageous bamboo platform of his small cottage. After he had given me sweetened lime juice and a piece of rock candy, we entered his patio and assumed the lotus posture. 4 hours of meditation passed. I opened my eyes and saw that the moonlit figure of the yogi was still motionless. As I was sternly reminding my stomach that man does not live by bread alone, Ram Gopal rose from his seat. I see you are famished, he said. Food will be ready soon. He kindled a fire under a clay oven on the patio. In a short time we were eating rice and dal, served on large banana tree leaves. My host had courteously refused my aid in cooking chores. The guest is God, a Hindu proverb, has commanded devout observance in India since time immemorial. In my later world travels I was charmed to see that a similar respect for visitors is manifest in the rural sections of many countries. The city dweller finds the keen edge of hospitality blunted by a superabundance of strange faces. Okay, that's the end for today. I'm in the middle of page 162. Bye.